communicating with server. Okay, so here we are. This is the first lecture on Chapter 4. Chapter 4 is on demand and supply. And as usual, I've got something from the Wall Street Journal. You know, it's getting a little difficult to find good articles now that so much of the news is politics. You know, the newscasters are spending less time on other issues. So, and when you do find something, it's usually connected to politics. But there was something in the on the opinion page today of the Wall Street Journal, and it says here, "Making Depressions Great Again." And I'm gonna read to you a little bit about this, but this ties in with this chapter on demand and supply because, you know, throughout this course, we're always concerned about the economic problem. You know, the economic problem is that we live in a world of scarce resources, and yet we have unlimited wants and needs. So how do we meet our needs in this world of scarcity? Now, when you live in a world of scarcity, then you have to make choices, correct? There are trade-offs. And in fact, I've got a video that I'm going to show you today that talks about two opinions in terms of student loans. And it's quite a lively debate between two people who've got quite opposite viewpoints. And is there a right and a wrong? And sometimes there's not. It's just two different viewpoints. But each viewpoint has its own consequences. And so there may not be a right or wrong, but there are consequences to one decision over another decision, or if we do things one way as opposed to doing things another way. Now, what this chapter is really all about is demand and supply, and it's the basics of how a free market system works. Now, what we've done is that we have modified the free market system to correct some of the inadequacies of a free market, but to understand the whole picture, you've first got to understand how a free market works, and then understand the consequences of altering or manipulating demand and supply, which is really what this, you know, what the video is all about. But what this is about, it says here, making depressions great again. The U.S. may renounce its trade leadership at a dangerous economic moment. It says the pace of global trade continues to tumble, an ominous trend for growth. Now, we've talked about the Baltic Dry Index earlier, and the Baltic Dry Index is a measure of the transportation on the high seas of raw materials, commodities, and that is at an all-time low. In other words, ships are not active, that they're moored in port, which is a sign that international trade is very much slowing down. And that's what they're saying here, that international trade has slowed down a lot, which is not good for growth. It's a bad sign. Meanwhile, the U.S. may renounce its historic role as the anchor of the open international trading system. Now, what they're talking about here is that since the Great Depression, the United States has been a world leader in basically favoring free trade, which free trade would be, well, allowing the market to work, period, without trying to force it to do things that it doesn't want to do. But there are several candidates. You know, we have an election coming up in November, and several of the candidates are in favor of trade restrictions. And so what we're doing here is we're saying, well, you know, let's not let the free market dictate events, but let's alter the free market to try to force it to do things that it doesn't want to do by itself. That's essentially what trade restrictions are all about. It says, okay, let's see. It says here, the Smoot-Hawley tariff was intended to protect U.S. jobs and farmers from foreign competition, but it engaged U.S. trading partners in a trade war. Now, what happened, the Smoot-Hawley tariff was passed in the early 1930s, and many economists attribute that high protective tariff as worsening the Great Depression. Now, economically, there is only one consequence of a trade war. Now, what a trade war is the thinking here is that if we put up tariffs up against foreign products, then the price of those foreign products will be higher, and therefore Americans will buy more American-made products. And the thinking goes is that that will stimulate demand for American products and generate more American jobs. But economically, that's false. Okay, I mean, there is truth, and the truth is that when one country puts up a protective tariff against another, that often leads to what is called a tariff war. What a tariff war is, well, if you put tariffs against my products, then, and therefore buy less from me, I'll put tariffs against your products, and therefore I'll buy less from you. And the result of these countries putting up higher tariffs is that prices for all products increase, and with higher prices, buying power goes down, people buy less, and with a lack of demand, a slowdown in demand, we get more unemployment. I mean, it is an economic truth, and there is no, some people may be in favor of trade restrictions, but economically, the only result possible with a trade war is that everyone loses. There are no winners in a trade war. And there's a connection between a trade war and a currency war. Now, I've talked to you before about what a currency war, and we are in the midst of a currency war. What a currency war is, our economy is sluggish. I mean, if I were some country, I say, well, my economy needs some stimulus, and if I can lower the value of my currency, then my products will be less expensive to foreigners. Foreigners will buy more from me, and as money flows into my country, that's good for me. Okay, so remember, a lower value currency is good, a high value currency is bad in terms of economic growth. A low currency relative to other currencies brings in more money. Okay, a high currency means that less money comes in, more money goes out, and over the long run, that's not good for growth. And what a currency war is if we were all different countries and I lower the value of my currency, but then that hurts you, and then you lower the value of your currency, and then someone else lowers the value of their currency, that's what's called a currency war. And no one wins a currency war. Well, that is related to a trade war. It's just a trade war is just a different way of, it's called a bigger thy neighbor policy. What a bigger thy neighbor policy is, I don't want to bear bad consequences of perhaps my past actions, but I want someone else to bear the consequences. That's called a bigger thy neighbor policy. And a trade war is where different countries may put up high tariffs against other countries. I put up high tariffs against you all, but that hurts you because I'm buying less from you, and so to protect your jobs in your country, you put tariffs up against me, and then other countries start put up and it cascades, and we have higher and higher tariffs in all countries, and that's what's called a trade war. And just like with the currency war, no one wins a tariff war. Everyone loses, and no one gains.
Okay. Yeah, question?
So is that what's going on with the gas too?
Well, the gas, it kind of is related. Now, I don't know all the ins and outs of the gas situation, but there is a possibility that some countries like Saudi Arabia is intentionally increasing the supply of gas to lower the price in order to drive some competitors like U.S. frackers out of business. And when that happens, then they can increase their price and have less competition. But that's not the only reason for the low gasoline prices. A sluggish economy, lower demand, oversupply. There's lots of factors here. But there's a possibility, and I don't know for sure, but it's the same thing with it could be a power play. Someone using their market power to enrich themselves, and that's really what tariff wars are all about, and currency wars are all about. But they're unsuccessful. It says. See, the Treasury can trigger punitive trade actions by declaring a country to be a currency manipulator. So what this article is saying is that when a country lowers the value of their currency, then that can lead to a tariff war. And the Smoot-Hawley tariff, by the way, see in the great early parts of the 30s, and we're going to spend more time on that later, but it certainly did make matters a whole lot worse for reasons I just talked about. That the problem in the 30s was insufficient demand, but if you have a protective tariff, and especially if you have a tariff war, then demand goes down because of the higher prices. So what happened with the Smoot-Hawley tariff that was passed in 1932 is that most economists look at that and say, well, that's one of the things that pushed perhaps a very serious recession into a full-blown depression. And the same thing can happen today. Our economy is very sluggish, and for many ways, you can say that it's still in a recession, not a depression, but a recession. But a tariff war would definitely make matters a lot worse. Anyway, any questions about that? All right. Well, I've got this video, and again, this is a pretty lively debate here. It's all about the student loan market, and the debate is whether to subsidize student loans, subsidize students to go to college by making loans easier, or is that not a good idea? Now, again, as you listen to this debate, is there a right or a wrong? Is one contestant right and the other wrong? Well, no, but there are simply differing opinions. And we're always, in economics, we're always going to have differing opinions because the economic problem recognizes that we have scarcity. And because of scarcity, we have to make choices. And those choices have consequences. Now, it's not that one consequence is right and the other is wrong. It's just difference of opinion, but the decisions made do have consequences. That's all. But it's not a matter of right or wrong. It's just simply a matter of differences of opinion. And we're always going to have differences of opinion because that's the way the world works. Because we live in a world of scarcity and because we have to make choices, we're always going to have a difference in opinions. Y'all with me on this? So don't take this as something negative. It's something positive. Okay?
But this may give you some food for thought.
Overthink again. With the feds now controlling the entire student loan market, taxpayers may soon be up on the hook for unpaid loans. Check this out. Barclays is warning that we may see a tsunami of student loan defaults through 2020, saying that the industry underestimated defaults by a whopping $225 billion. Euro Pacific's Peter Schiff says that the government should never have gotten into this sector in the first place. Diana Carew of the Progressive Policy Institute says the government has to be involved. High school is not enough in this day and age. Peter, good to have you on the program, and thanks Diana for joining us. Why is this a bad idea, Peter?
Well, just like the government inflated a housing bubble, the reason that tuitions are so high is because government guarantees the loans. And now students take these guarantees and bid tuitions through the roof. Take the government out of the equation, and the colleges and universities have to lower tuitions so students can afford to go.
See, well, the reason why this fits in with this chapter on demand and supply is that what he's saying is that with more generous student loans, there's an encouraging more people to go to college. There's an increase in the demand, right? There's going to be an increase in demand for a college education, and that increase in demand has led to an increase in cost, or for you, cost, an increase in tuitions. Okay, that's what he's saying.
But the beneficiaries of these high tuitions are not the students. They get stuck with the debt. It's the colleges and the universities that can sell overpriced degrees. And unfortunately, right now, we've got a lot of people with college degrees, waiting tables, cleaning toilets, driving taxis, and they have enormous government debt to pay back out of these small salaries that they earn.
Yeah, well, that's a good point. Diana, you're saying that the government has to be involved. Why?
Because investment in human capital is never a waste of money. Of all the things that the government can spend their money on, entitlement programs, subsidizing the housing sector, human capital should never be sacrificed. And I completely agree that the college graduates today, especially young college graduates, have been hard hit by the recession, a recession they never predicted. And it's not fair to ask them to shoulder the burden alone. They have seen their wages fall by 15% in real terms over the last decade. Meanwhile, their debt has risen 25%. And it's completely unacceptable to suggest that every college student does not have the right to go to school. They should all have the opportunity to pursue an education.
But look at these numbers. Barclays warning that we're going to see a tsunami of student loan defaults through 2020. So how has the government been positive here?
I think the government has a clear role to play here in the long term. I mean, look, we need to realize, and as soon as we all agree that education is a social good, we'll all be better off. We need to invest in our future. We need to invest in the economy. And right now, the economy is the big problem. There aren't enough jobs being created for college grads, especially young college grads. So they are driving buses. They are hairstylists. And that's a big problem because they're squeezing, essentially, young non-college grads out of those jobs, and then they're taking a pay cut that can't pay for their debt. And so the problem is having a low growth economy. The only way out of this is to educate kids and get them into jobs that are better paid.
Let me get a word in here, because wasting money overpaying for worthless degrees is not going to help the economy. In fact, it
No
hurts the
degree
economy.
is worthless. You're always acquiring skills. You're always acquiring skills. It's whether or not the jobs are there that you can utilize those skills.
A lot of the curriculum, a lot of the courses do very little to improve human capital. Look, plenty of people went to college before the government got involved. It just didn't cost nearly as much. People didn't graduate college with a mortgage. Now they do.
I
but
don't
the
think
problem is,
colleges are setting prices based on how much students can take out of the
yeah, of
bank.
course, no. They're basing the prices on the fact that students could borrow money with government guarantees. If the government got out of the
I
market,
think there's more to it than that.
no, there isn't. That's exactly the problem. If the government got out of the market, students couldn't borrow money so cheaply. Interest rates would rise, and students wouldn't be able to bid up prices.
Right,
Colleges
so
would.
you get to decide who gets to go to college, and so only
No, I don't-
students get to go to college.
No,
That's a very good message
No,
to send.
it's not up to the government to pay for everybody's college degree, and you don't have a right to go to college. I mean, people should go to college.
I think everybody should should have the opportunity to go to college, and I don't think you should decide who gets to go to
No, I'm
college
not
and who gets to have
deciding it,
that
but,
opportunity.
but by subsidizing it, they create this huge bubble. Do you think students are really better off? I've had plenty of students on my radio show. The biggest regret in their life is that they went to college, because now they're stuck with an enormous debt. I had one
They're
young
stuck with
woman
a
on
low
my show.
innovation economy that's not creating
No, no.
the right type of
But
jobs.
what
And
the
that is
reason?
problem.
The reason they're not creating the jobs is the government is diverting all the capital to education,
Of
and
all
it's not
things the
going to
government is
businesses.
spending money on, I hardly would suggest that
No.
I would be hard pressed to
No.
find somebody that would suggest that investing
Well,
in college education is a bad investment.
Yeah, you
But
found
we're
me.
saying
It's
the
a
government-
lousy investment. We
Well,
are
we're saying that
squandering
never
our
allowed the investment,
Found
and when
me.
that's the
Yes,
case,
it is.
then we've got a real problem on our
No,
hands, because the only
not
way forward, the
everybody.
only way to invest in our future is through education.
No, not
That is
everybody
the way
needs.
growth.
Not everybody needs a college degree. This is what you're doing is playing into the universities
I'm not
and
saying
colleges.
everybody needs a
They
college
want to.
degree.
They want to
Anybody who wants to go
exploit
to
our
college
kids.
should get to go to college. They should have that opportunity.
They have the
The
opportunity
question is,
without the
who's paying
government.
for it? I mean, who's paying for it? I mean, our taxpayers, once again, on the hook here.
Like with other things, like with entitlement programs, like with the housing sector, of all of the things that taxpayers would be on the hook for, I would argue that education is probably one of the least controversial.
Oh, it is very controversial. And, because of the government, today, a college degree is not worth the price that you pay for it. Not only in the cost, but the
And I
5 or
agree,
6
and
years
that's a big problem.
that you're not in the labor force. But if we simply got the government out of education, college tuitions would plunge. Colleges would be
I
forced
do
to
not agree
compete.
with that.
Oh,
I do
well,
not
that's
think
basic
that you need to be
economics.
college. I think that I'm well aware of basic economics. Thank you. But I
Well,
would
apparently
argue
you're
that
not.
yes, I am. Thank you. But I would argue that there's a lot more variables at play in a college
Well, no,
college prices
it's prices,
as opposed
prices
to.
are determined by supply and demand. If you take away the demand by taking away the guaranteed loans, colleges will have to stop building these fancy gymnasiums and these fancy, campus housings or the big restaurants. They'll have to cut prices. They'll have to cut the pay of some of their
They'll have to cut
administrators and
their
bureaucrats.
faculty. They'll
Yeah.
have to cut their technology.
No.
They'll have to cut their investment.
No, they won't.
Absolutely.
No,
Yes, they will.
the technology will probably increase. Look, in the 1950s, students got great educations in college,
Yeah.
and it didn't cost anything. Kids used to work their way through college, and they graduated debt-free
And there were
with
jobs
degrees.
for them.
I know.
You
and
know
what-
what, we're gonna agree to disagree,
What
but
are
these
they?
are all very, very good points. Thank you so much, Peter, Diana, great conversation.
Thank you
Appreciate
very much.
laying it all out for us. Thank you.
Well, that was entertaining. Let's see. Well, see, the question, I mean, what this video brought out was, do we let the market, supply and demand, determine tuition, or do we modify the market? Do we bring government in terms of student loans to modify the market? See, and that's why this video works in so well with this chapter on demand and supply. Well, before you can really even have an opinion, and it's very often an opinion. So the Robert. Robert Ricardo, earlier years in 1800s, he wrote, that economics simply determines what is produced, but it's society that determines who gets what and how much. So it's, who gets what and how much is not economics. It's sociology. It's, the society decides, who gets what and how much. Economics decides, what and how is going to be produced. Okay, so we got two different things here. Anyway, let's get to this chapter. Let's see, slideshow from beginning. This is chapter 4, demand and supply and markets. See, there's 3 parts to this chapter. The first part is on demand. The second part is on supply, and then the third part is where we put the two together because the market is demand and supply. All right? So what is a market, first of all? A group of buyers and sellers with the potential to trade.
So a market is simply a place where buyers and sellers can come together. Like when we go to the supermarket, a big grocery store, well, that's a market. That, it's a physical place where there's one group who's selling food and another group who's interested in buying food. Okay, that's a market. Now remember, in economics, unless there's a market transaction, then we are not interested. Correct? I've talked about this before. If General Motors manufactures a car and that car sits in the parking lot, is that car part of supply? No, it's not. Why? Because no one has bought it. Okay, in order for us to consider it, someone has to put a value on it and say, I'm willing to separate X number of dollars for this car. And therefore we say, well, that car now has value. Someone has placed value on it, and therefore we count it as part of supply. So what is demand? A relation showing the quantities of a good consumers are willing and able to buy at various prices during a given period of time, other things constant. Now there's a lot in this definition, and I've underlined the words willing and able. When we measure demand, it's not all possible combinations, but it's the combination of price and quantity that people are willing, meaning they want to, and they're able, meaning they've got the money to buy what we're talking about. They've got the income. So it's a measure of goods and services that people are willing and able to buy at various prices. Other things constant. Now, other things constant, one of the most important things you can remember from this chapter, now, if you're daydreaming a little bit, just perk up your ears here, because this is vitally important for everything we do in this chapter. But in economics, when we change price, we always assume that nothing else changes. Okay, that's a simplification. And if you understand that, and I'll give you lots of practice on this, but if you really understand that, it's going to simplify things for you. Because that is a simplification. See, what we do in this chapter is we say, okay, if we change price and nothing else changes, then what is the result? And we always, 100% of the time, this is one of the rules of economics. When we change price and then we say, okay, what's going to result because of this change in price, we always assume that nothing else changes. Okay? Very important. So what is a demand curve? A curve showing the quantities of a commodity demanded at various possible prices, other things constant. See, that other things constant means that nothing else changes other than price. Now, later, we're not always going to say other things constant, because you should, without saying it, you should know that that's always the case. So what is a change in the quantity demanded? A movement along a demand curve in response to a change in the price. Again, I've said it, but we don't always have to say it, other things constant. A movement along a stationary curve. When price changes, we're always moving along a stationary curve. The curve itself is not changing when price changes. And again, that's another important thing you have to realize or remember. When price changes, we're moving along a stationary curve, but the curve itself is not changing. Why do demand curve have a negative slope? At a higher price, consumers will buy fewer units, and at a lower price, they will buy more units. Now, keep in mind here that we're not trying to design an economic system. What we're doing is like we're impartial observers, and we're looking at a free market, and we're simply drawing a picture of how that free market operates. That's what this demand, these demand and supply curves that we're going to talk about, and we're going to talk about the equilibrium price and market prices. All we're doing here, we're not designing anything. We're simply saying that left on its own, this is how a totally free market would work. Okay? So in a free market, it's just normal that consumers will buy fewer units as the price goes up and more units as the price goes down, right? I mean, that's pretty common sense. What does an inverse relationship between price and quantity mean? And this is just vocabulary. When we look at the demand curve, we say that there's an inverse relationship between price and quantity. What that means is when price goes up, the quantity demand goes down. When price goes down, the quantity demand goes up. That's an inverse relationship. The price and quantity move in opposite directions. That's what the word inverse means. So this is just, some vocabulary. So much of economics is just vocabulary. You got to understand the vocabulary in order that we can communicate. So what is the law of demand? The quantity of a good demanded is inversely related to its price, other things constant. We call that the law of demand. Price goes up, the quantity demanded goes down. Price goes down, the quantity demanded goes up. And now sometime you will, again, this is just terminology, you hear something, economists or a book might talk about a demand schedule, and the only difference between a demand curve and demand schedule is how we portray what is happening. A demand schedule shows the specific quantity of a good or service that people are willing and able to buy at different prices. And this is a demand schedule is shown to us on a graph, on a chart. And as you can see here, that as the price goes down for milk, in this case, what's happening to the quantity demanded? It's going up, see? Now, this is a demand schedule because we call it schedule because it's showing us this information on a graph. But now, this is a demand. It's not a graph, but it's a demand curve. And the only difference is that instead of showing the information on the graph, on the table, it's showing to us on the graph. Now, economists they like to use graphs and they like to use tables to show relationships. Now, the advantage of a table over a graph is that a table can be more specific. On a table, you have a bunch of numbers, and you can see the very specific relationship between a change in one thing as opposed to a change in the other. But the advantage of a graph is that you can see the bigger picture better. It may not be as detailed as a table, but it's easier to see the bigger picture with a graph. So sometimes economists use tables, like with demand schedules, if they want to be very specific, but at other times they may use a graph if they simply don't want to be specific, but they want you to see the bigger picture. And so then we would use a graph instead of a table. So anyway, here we're showing the demand curve for milk on a graph. And notice here, when price changes, when price goes down, what's happening? Now, let me do this again, because this is very important. As price goes down, does anyone see demand change? No, demand's not changing. Now, what is demand? Demand is that blue line, correct? Demand is that blue line with a capital D, right? Now, watch this. I'll do it again. Whoops. Let's see. When price goes down, I want you to notice here that demand is not changing. Okay? See, demand That blue line's not changing, is it? Right? Demand's not changing. Now, let me do it again. When price goes down, what is changing? Well, what's changing is not demand. What's changing is the quantity demanded as measured down here on the horizontal axis. See, again, let me do that again. When price goes down, demand itself is not changing, but what is changing is the quantity demanded as measured on the horizontal axis. See that? So what you got to do, your biggest challenge in this chapter is to train your ears to differentiate between a change in demand and a change in the quantity demanded. See, that thing over there is a door, and this thing here is a computer monitor, right? A door is a door, a monitor is a monitor, two different things. A change in demand is one thing, a change in the quantity demanded is something else. It's just like, that door and this monitor, two different things. A change in demand, one thing, a change in the quantity demanded, something else. So those are two different things, all right? Now, I'm really emphasizing this because I know by past experience that students have had, this is a stumbling block in this chapter. Why do consumers buy more as price decreases and less when price increases? Now, what we're going to find here is that may sound obvious to you, correct? Okay, the price goes up, everything else being equal, people buy less. Price goes down, everything else being equal, people buy more. But economists like to be more specific. In other words, economists like to consider themselves more like they're scientists, and they can prove things. And so that's what they do here in this case. Even though it may be pretty obvious, they like to have a proof that this relationship holds true. And they've come up with two ways of showing that when the price goes up, people buy less, and the price goes down, people buy more. Now, one way of proving that, again, it may be pretty obvious, but again, we're going to try to prove it because we're trying to be scientific here. One way of proving it is what is called the substitution effect. What the substitution effect is that when the price of a good falls, consumers will substitute it for other goods which are now relatively expensive. So in other words, everything has substitutes, especially up to a certain price. Things have substitutes. And so when the price of a good goes up, people will buy less of it because they will substitute something else for that good. Okay? And this is one explanation of why people buy less when the price goes up and buy more when the price goes down, because of the substitution effect. People can substitute other products that are now relatively less expensive.
That's the same as substituting Kraft macaroni for True Value.
Yeah, exactly. Kraft macaroni and True Value, those are substitutes. So if the price of one goes up, people will buy more of the other. And so now, before I can explain to you the next proof of this, I have to make some vocabulary announcements here. What is money income? The number of dollars received for a period of time, such as $100 per week. Money income is how many dollar bills that you receive. Okay? But there is something called real income. There's money income and there's real income. And real income is not just those dollar bills that you receive. but it's what those dollar bills can buy. In other words, your money income may go up by 5%, but if inflation is 5%, at least inflation of the things that you would normally buy, then we say that your money income maybe has gone up 5%, but your real income, your buying power, has actually stayed the same. Your money income's gone 5%, but the prices of those things that you buy has gone up by 5%. So you gain in one hand, lose on the other hand. So your money income has increased 5%, but your real income has actually stayed the same. Now the point here is that when you're talking about demand, what determines the level of demand? Money income or real income? Well, ultimately, it's real incomes, right? I mean, people may be fooled for a while with a change in their money income, but it doesn't take long for reality to set in, and ultimately, people are going to make decisions based on their buying power, which is their real income, not necessarily their money income. Okay? So anyway, that's now we can talk about the income effect, because you have to know the difference between money income and real income before I could talk about the income effect. Again, this is the second explanation of why people buy less as the price goes up and people buy more as the price goes down. Okay? And what the income effect is the second explanation. It says a fall in the price of a good increases consumers' real income, making them more able to purchase all goods, so the quantity demanded increases. So as the price goes down, our real incomes go up, and therefore we can buy more goods and services. Okay? Price goes down, our real incomes go up, we can afford to buy more, so price goes down, then the quantity demand goes up. So what is individual demand? The demand for an individual consumer. Now, what is the name of this course? The name of this course is macroeconomics, correct? So we're looking at things in the large. So we're not interested in individual demand, see? We're interested in market demand or total demand, or another word that we often use is aggregate demand. Now in microeconomics, we may study individual demand curves, like the demand curve of a corporation, perhaps. But in macroeconomics, we're not interested in individual demands, although market demand is made up of individual demands, but we're interested in the larger picture. So we're interested in market demand or aggregate demand, or we can call it total demand for goods and services. Okay, and again, a lot of definitions in this chapter. Normal good, a good for which demand increases as consumers' incomes rise. A normal good, see, I might ask you, if people's, again, we're talking about macroeconomics, we're talking about total demand here. So if people's incomes increase, will they buy more of every good and service? And the answer is, well, no, they won't. As people's, plural now, as people's incomes increase, they will buy more of some things, but they will buy less of other things. For example, if people's real incomes, buying power increased, then people may buy more steak, but they may buy fewer hot dogs. Or people, as their incomes increase, they will buy more new cars, but as a result, they will purchase fewer used cars, right? Or as people's incomes increase, there will be an increase in demand for houses, but then maybe a decrease in demand for rental property. You see what I mean? So when people's incomes increase, they will buy more of some things and less of other things. Now,
those things that people will tend to buy more of as their incomes increase, we call a normal good. And things that people buy less of as their incomes increase, we call inferior goods. So like steak may be a normal good, whereas hot dogs or hamburger might be an inferior good. New cars would be a normal good. A used car would be an inferior good. See what I mean? Now, what are complements? Goods that are related in such a way that an increase in the price of one leads to a decrease in the demand for another. So in other words, if you look at different products, you've got sometimes there's no relationship between one product and another, but sometimes there is a relationship. You know, like, is there a relationship between cars and gasoline? Well, yeah, of course, right? I mean, you can't drive a car without putting gasoline in it. So there's a relationship there, okay? And these are called complementary goods. Cars and gasoline complement one another, okay? Now, what are substitutes? Substitutes are two things may be related, not as being complementary goods, but as being substitutes. Like hot dogs and hamburgers might be a substitute. You know, maybe you eat a hot dog, or maybe you'll eat a hamburger. You can substitute a hot dog for a hamburger. See, these are not complementary goods. I mean, you know, they don't go together, but they're related because they are substitutes for one another. So maybe two goods are not related at all, or if two goods and services are related, they will be related as either being complementary goods or being substitutes. Now, you know, what we've done so far here is that we've just talked about vocabulary and concepts, but here in a few moments I'm going to put this together and show you how we use this to understand demand. So what is a change in demand? A shift in a given demand curve caused by a change in one of the non-price determinants of demand for the good. Now, if I say there's a change in the quantity demanded, well, that means that price has changed, and as a result, the demand curve itself has not changed, but there's a change in the quantity demanded as measured by the horizontal axis. But if I say that there's a change in demand, then the whole curve is going to shift. Now, what can cause a change in demand as opposed to a change in the quantity demanded? What can cause a shift in the demand, what causes the whole demand curve to shift, is something other than price is going to change. Okay? So now, more specifically, certain things determine demand, you know, this good or that good, and we call those non-price determinants. A non-price determinant is, well, something that's going to affect demand here, but it's not price. See, it's a non-price determinant, something that determines demand, but it's not price. So when a non-price determinant changes, then we're going to get a shift in the whole curve. See? Oh my gosh. So like this, you see, we have an increase in the demand from D to D prime. Now, what would cause this increase in demand? Well, something would have to change that affects demand other than price. Okay? And we're going to look at, see exactly what kinds of things can change that would cause shifts in demand other than price. Now, price doesn't cause a shift in demand. It causes a change in the
quantity demanded. See, important, know the difference between a change in the quantity demanded and a change in demand. Two different things. Now, we're getting down to the nitty-gritty here. Now, what can cause a change in the demand of a good or service? And a change in this little guy, what he's doing is he's changing the page. So it says, go to the next page to get the answer. And these are things that can change demand. These are non-price determinants that can affect a change or a shift in a demand curve. Now, the number in the market. What we've learned is that as more people enter into a market, then there's a tendency for demand to increase. Now, here's another thing about economics. Did I say that as more people come into the market, that there will be an increase in demand? See, I didn't say that, because I can't say that, because I don't know that for sure. But what I can say for sure is that as we draw more people into the market, there's going to be a tendency for demand to increase. See, those are something else about economics. We very often use that word tendency. There's a tendency to do this. There's a tendency to do that. We can't say that for sure people will do this or they will do that, but we can say that given certain situations, there's a tendency for them to do this or a tendency for them to do that. So, for example, for a while, Kroger's gave double coupons. Now, what months did Kroger's give double coupons? Well, they gave double coupons in the first week and in the the second week and the fourth week. And why do they do that? Well, because they realize that most people get paid twice a month. And, you get paid on the 1st and you get paid on the 15th, let's say. Well, what do a lot of people do when they get their paychecks? What a lot of families do is they go out and do a big grocery shopping. All right? But in the off weeks, which would be the second week or the fourth week, they may go to the grocery store and, buy milk and buy a few things, but they don't do a great big grocery shopping. So how did grocery stores like Kroger's attract more people into the store on those slow weeks? Well, those are the weeks that they offer double coupons. Now, notice here that when they offer double coupons, it wasn't double coupons on all goods, all food products, but only a selected a number of products. Okay, but Kroger's realized that when people come into the store, there's a reason why milk is at the very back of the store. Well, yeah, there's a very good reason for that, right? All your dairy products are always at the back of the store because that's something that people buy on a regular basis. So when they go to the store, they got to pass through all these aisles where all these other food products are for sale, and they might pass this food product or that food product and say, oh, well, I need this or I need that. And so, it's all planned, right? But the point is this, Kroger's realized that if they could draw more people into the market, that there would be a tendency for people to buy more. And that's what we're talking about here. Okay, so the more people in the market, there's a tendency for demand to increase. Now, when I say the market, well, it depends on what market you're talking about. Like if I was talking about Kroger's, I was talking about the groceries, market, right? But it could be the car market, the used car market, or the new car market, or it could be the housing market. I mean, all these are different markets. But the same thing is true, like back when interest rates start to increase in the mortgage market, then what often happens is that there's an increase in the demand for houses. How come? Well, because there's a lot of people. See, can you be in the market to buy a house, but not buy a house? Well, yeah, not everyone in the market ends up buying. Only those people who can find what they want at the price they want to pay, end up buying, right? I mean, can you go to the grocery store, not find what you want, and walk out without buying anything? Yeah. I mean, you were in the market, but you didn't buy. Why? Because you didn't find what you wanted at the price you're willing to pay. See, not everyone in the market ends up buying. But being in the market means that you're interested, that you're looking. So there's X number of people that are in the market to buy houses. Now, when interest rates go up, well, some people think, well, with the increase in interest rates, if they keep going up, we may not be able to afford to buy a house. So maybe we better not wait for our dream house to come along or wait for us to have more down payment. Maybe we better buy now before we're forever priced out of the market. So an increase in interest rates tends to what? It tends to increase the demand for houses. Okay? At least for a while. All right, consumer income. Now, when we're talking about income here, when we're talking about real income. Let me see where I go on this. Yeah, I do. Okay. When incomes change, then there's, and again, when we say income, we mean real income. See, I don't say real income here because you should know that if we're talking about demand, we're talking about real income and not money income. Okay? So when there's an increase in incomes, then there is going to be an increase in demand for some things and a decrease in demand for other things. So when there's a change in consumer income, demand curves can either shift to the right or shift to the left, depending upon whether that is a normal good or an inferior good. See, an increase in incomes will cause a demand curve for inferior goods to go down, but it'll cause the demand for normal goods to go up. Okay. Now, prices of related goods. Now, here you got to be a little careful. If two things are related, then a change in the price of one will cause a change in the demand for the other. Now, how demand increases depends on whether the two goods are related as being substitutes or being complements. Now, here is where you cannot rely on your memory. Okay? You just have to use common sense. You just have to use logic. In fact, I was just helping. A student came into my office yesterday, and he needed help in some test questions in the microeconomics. And in microeconomics, that's Econ 202. Not this course, but the next course. I remember telling them. I said, they really ought to change the name of this course to economics logic. Because so much of microeconomics is simply logic. I mean, it's simply understanding certain principles and then reasoning out, cause and effect, and you got to know how things are related, and then be able to see the bigger, see how things are related, and use your logic in doing so. Now, macroeconomics, this course is somewhat like that. Not nearly as much as with microeconomics, but this is one of those cases where you just have to think about it and not try to commit it to memory. See, when prices of related goods change, then what effect will that have on if the price of one changes, what effect would that have on the other? Well, you got to think about it. All right, let's look at two goods that are complements. For example, cars and gasoline, or hot dogs and mustard, maybe. Let's take hot dogs and mustard. When the price of hot dogs goes up, what are people going to do? What's going to happen? Well, when the price of hot dogs goes up, the quantity demanded will go down, correct? Now notice here I didn't say demand changed, because what's changing here is the price. So when the price of hot dogs go up, the quantity demanded goes down. But if people are going to buy fewer hot dogs, see, we're assuming here that hot dogs and mustard are complementary goods. So as people buy fewer hot dogs, what's going to happen to the demand for mustard? It's going to go down. Now, see, notice the lingo here. The price of hot dogs goes up. So the quantity demanded goes down. But as a result, the demand, now notice here I'm not saying quantity demanded, see, the demand for mustard goes down. See, now you just, like on a test, if you get a question, we just got to think about it. Don't try to memorize it. Just think about it. If two things are complements, that means that they kind of go together. Well, if people buy less of one, then they will tend to buy less of the other. And again, I'm using that word tendency. I'm not saying they will for sure, but we're saying that there's a tendency for people to, if they buy less of one, they will buy less of the other. Okay? But now what happens if two goods are substitutes? If two goods are substitutes, when there's an increase in the price of one, what are people going to do? Buy more of the other, correct? Mm-hmm. So if the price of good A goes up, the quantity demanded will go down, correct? But as a result, the demand for its substitute will go up, right? If two things are substitutes and the price of one goes up, then people will tend to buy more of the substitute, right? And again, that's just logic. If you think about it, it just makes sense. And that's what you got to do with this. You got to think about it and see the logic behind it. Okay, well, consumer expectations can change. This is another, see, again, let me emphasize, what are we doing here? What we're doing here is that I'm explaining some of the non-price determinants that can cause a shift in demand curves. Meaning that, the whole curve is going to move to the right or move to the left. Now, consumer expectations can be a powerful force, more powerful than many people might realize. But there's a tendency, and again I use that word tendency. There's a tendency for expectations to be a self-fulfilling prophecy. In other words, if enough people believe that prices in the stock market are going to go up in the near future, then what are a lot of those people that are in the market to buy stocks, what are they going to do? They're going to buy now. Because that's how you make money in the stock market, right? You buy low and sell high, right? So if you think the prices are going to go up, then more of those people will buy. But as the demand for stocks increase, what happens to the price of stocks in the stock market? Prices go up. Well, why did the prices go up? Because people expected prices to go up. Was there any other reason? Well, no, I didn't mention any other reasons. I just said that, you know, there's a change in people's expectations, and that led to a definite result. Now, if enough people in the market for stocks believe, for whatever reason, that the prices are going to go down, then what are they going to do? Well, they're going to sell more than they buy, and prices are going to go down. Well, why did the prices go down? Because people expected prices to go down. See, if people expect higher prices, they get higher prices. If they expect lower prices, they get lower prices. See, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's like if I could spread a rumor that we were going to have a shortage of sugar. Now notice here that it's not. It's only expectations. In other words, let's say that there's no possibility that there's going to be a shortage of sugar, that there's nothing that's happened that would cause a shortage of sugar. But I was able to convince a bunch of people, maybe even by telling lies, that we were going to have a shortage of sugar. Now, if I could convince enough people that we were going to have a shortage of sugar, what are a lot of those people in the market for sugar going to do?
Buy sugar right now.
Yeah, they're going to go out and run buy sugar now, or instead of buying one bag, they'll buy 2 or 3 bags, right? Well, if they do that, then what's going to result? A shortage of sugar. Well, how come we had a shortage of sugar? Because people expected us to have a shortage. Was there any other reason? No, there was no other reason, except people expected us to have a shortage. Again, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. You know, whatever we expect to happen, happens. Okay? You know, that is so true in life. You know, so often in life, you know, whatever it is you expect is what you get. Expectations, powerful force. So expectations can change, and with those change in expectations, demand curves can either shift to the right or shift to the left. Now, what's tricky about this expectations thing is that it can be very emotional, or it can change very, very quickly. In other words, rumors and maybe big events. You know, people can be very optimistic, and then something catastrophic can happen, and then all of a sudden everyone becomes very pessimistic. I mean, you know, this is something that can change very quickly. Anyway, that's going to be important here coming up. Consumer demographics is another reason that can influence demand curves. Now, what demographics is environment. The demographics for air conditioners is more favorable in Florida than it is in Canada. You know, the hot weather in Florida means more people will buy air conditioners. The colder weather in Canada means fewer people will buy air conditioners. Well, that's what we call demographics. Okay, and demographics has an effect on demand curves. Demographics might be seasonal too. You know, like the demographics in summer is different than the demographics in winter. You know, in the winter there's a bigger demand for snow shovels. In the summer there's a bigger demand for rakes, or especially like in the fall there's more of a demand for rakes. I mean, you see that again. You see that's what we call demographics. So a change in demographics, you know, can affect demand curves. And lastly, consumers' tastes and preferences can change. Sometimes there's a reason for it, sometimes there's not. If you want to work out a mathematical an intricate mathematical problem, would you rather use a slide rule or a computer? Well, a computer would be a lot better than a slide rule, right? In fact, there's not too many people that even understand slide rules anymore. You know, they're like antiques. Well, that's consumer taste. Or you can type a paper on a computer, or you can use a typewriter. Well, again, consumer taste, right? But consumer taste can change. You know, like the change in technology has meant that more people prefer typing papers on a computer than a typewriter. Okay, so consumer taste. So sometimes there's a reason. Sometimes there's not a definite reason for a change in consumer taste. Like, you know, fads come and go. You know, ties get narrower, then they get wider, and then they disappear altogether. You know, I've noticed that. You know, even you know, watching television news programs, how casual people are. You know, and you know, 20 years ago, certainly 20 years ago, I mean, if you were on television, you always had a tie on. Well, today, you know, people, sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. Well, you know, consumer taste can change over time. And as consumer tastes change, you know, fads come and go, wide ties, narrow ties, no ties, then there's an increase in demand for some things and a decrease in demand for other things. Okay? So here you have 6 non-price determinants that can cause a shift in demand curves. Now I'm done, you know, the next part of this chapter is on supply, and I'm going to cover that, you know, next time. And supply won't take as long as demand because there's a lot of carryover. But next time I'm going to talk about supply, and then I'm going to talk about putting the two together, and I'm going to talk about the market. Because so far we haven't been talking about the market. We've been talking about just simply the demand side of the market. But you know, in conclusion, let me just re-emphasize that when there's a change in price, there's going to be a change in the quantity demanded as measured on the horizontal axis. That when there's a change in price, the demand curve itself does not change. Now, what can cause a change in the whole demand curve is a change in some non-price determinant. And what is a non-price determinant? Well, here are the 6 non-price determinants that can cause a shift in demand curves. Okay? So any questions about any of this? Well, let's call it a day then. And next time I'm going to pick up supply, then we'll finish this. Oh, by the way, you know, we've got next week off. Next week is spring break. Can you believe that? Wow, yeah, me too. Anyway, I'll see you all Thursday.
I don't know if it relates to this or not, but
Yeah, wait a minute. Wait a minute. Let me turn this thing off.